Okay. Kia ora koutou, whaatalofa atu. My name is Lana Lopesi, and I'm an author at Critic and Editor based in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, New Zealand. You are watching a virtual talk held in conjunction with the 10th Asia Pacific Triennial of Contemporary Art at QAGOMA, or as it's affectionately known, APT 10. Today's virtual talk is titled Indigenous Futurism, and we will be exploring how Indigenous artists from a range of cultures and perspectives are depicting futuristic narratives in their work, discussing the power of narratives in decolonizing art and community. It's my great pleasure to be joined by APT 10 artists Gordon Hookey, Mayur and Tushar Vayeda, and Subash Limbu. To start, I thought we could all just go around and do a quick self-introduction. And so just let everyone know who you are and where you're joining in from, and then we'll go straight into the discussion from there. Should we start with you, Gordon?
Gordon Hookey, artist based in Brisbane here, and I'm working on a large piece called Murrayland for APT, which we'll all be sharing. And my work is Murrayland's about making art about the history of Queensland from an Aboriginal perspective.
Cool, thanks, Gordon. We'll go to you, Subash.
Siwaru inga yaktung lajelam Subash Thebe Limbu. Allo kon Nepal Mingle Kushinganitum. Hello everyone, my name is Subash Thebe Limbu from Yaktung Nation, from what we currently know as Nepal. At the moment, I'm making a documentary and science fiction, kind of docu-fiction for APT, and it basically deals with explores and deals with Indigenous futurism and how we see ourselves in the future.
Awesome, thank you. We'll go Mayur and Tushar.
Okay, so I'm Mayur, this is Tushar, and it's Vayeda brothers, people call us Vayeda brothers, and we are from Woli tribal community, which is based on western part of Mumbai, northern side from Mumbai, and currently we are practicing Woli painting from last decade. And for this exhibition, we have produced 2 series which are based on 2 very popular folklore stories and myths from Woli community. So one is Disappearing Spirits and Childhood Memories, and another one is Creation of the World.
Awesome, thank you. So I suppose to just provide some context for this conversation, I thought I'd just do a brief introduction to kind of Indigenous futurism more broadly. So early science fiction writing draws heavily on the history and discourse of colonialism and ideas such as first encounter, invasion, and the end of humanity. Thus, science fiction is not completely fictional, but if read in a certain way, can offer a parody of imperialism. Therefore, Indigenous futurism contends that the dystopian future of science fiction has already occurred for Indigenous peoples who have suffered land confiscation, cultural loss, and the end of their world as they knew it. The futures of science fiction then are a future imaginary of the past that today's Indigenous artists are already living in. I imagine Indigenous futurism as creating a really important break from the colonial imaginary and the way in which colonial histories remember us and tell us our own stories. With an Indigenous futurist approach to art making, we can project Indigenous life into the future. So I wanted to start, I suppose, at the epicenter of APT, which is coming back to you, Gordon. And so you're presenting Murrayland 1 with Murrayland 2, which is a new work. Still in progress, or are we done?
Oh no, we're still in progress.
Still going.
I'm burning the candles at both ends in order to get it ready in time.
Well, you're looking good considering.
Oh, thank you.
So there are 2 epic paintings which represent Australian history through historical narratives which have been erased. I was hoping you could tell us a bit more about the particular histories that you have resurfaced in those works.
Well, generally the guide was from another Indigenous artist from the Congo, Shubumba Mutulu, who painted the history of the Congo from a Congolese perspective. And of course, the Congo region was brutally invaded by Belgium, and King Leopold, it was said that he was more brutal than Hitler with some of the atrocities that had happened in the Congo. So Shubumba done about 101 paintings of his perception of history. And I guess I was commissioned to do likewise with Queensland, with the Aboriginal, from an Aboriginal perspective. So I took a timeline, from the beginning of time right up until now, the present, and also into the future, as to how I would imagine my history would be, or imagine our victory, because feeling good about myself, about my people, and about what we want to achieve, just keeps me making art.
And in Moreland too, you've painted sort of 6 new scenes recognising local Aboriginal heroes. Could you tell us who those heroes are and why you choose those particular ones?
Well, I suppose one of the major heroes that I've incorporated in my picture was Dundalli, who was a resistant fighter in the Brisbane Redcliffe Pine Rivers area. And he kept the invaders at bay for something like 13 years. And there's a whole lot of things that happened in history because of him. For example, the old colonial strategy of divide and conquer was very much utilised because they had to use Aboriginal people from down south, the native police, in order to try and capture him. So the native police was formed because of Dundalli, but also the location of Brisbane. Most cities in Australia are right on the coast, but Brisbane is kind of inland. And of course, Dundalli's people live, on the coast, the Pine Rivers area in Brisbane. So it's kind of a settlement, or Brisbane grew around where Dundalli wasn't, because I guess the invaders felt safer where Brisbane rose up as a city here now. So we can attribute that as well. But so he kind of embodies the spirit of our resistance as well. But another hero, I think, that I utilise in my picture is Eddie Gilbert. Eddie Gilbert is an Aboriginal cricketer who was under the Act. That under the Act meant that us Aboriginal people, we were kept on missions and reserves. So they were kind of like little concentration camps. We were moved from our areas, our countries, and put in this one area. We're a long way away from home. And Eddie Gilbert was one of those Aboriginal men who was imprisoned or kept on a mission. And because he was such a good cricketer, special permission was given for him to come and play cricket in the Queensland team. And in the scenario that I paint, it shows that Australia has this all-conquering cricket hero called Don Bradman. And Don Bradman, I think that the first test after the war, he single-handedly beat England in England. He was averaging something over 100, if you're familiar with cricket. And I think in the local competition back in Queensland, when Queensland was playing New South Wales, Don Bradman played for New South Wales. Eddie Gilbert got him out for a duck, for 0. And Bradman made some kind of comment whereby saying that his bowling was the equal of Larwood and the great English bowlers. That's when he first came off, but then he changed his tune about an hour later and said that he was cheating. And as a result of that, Eddie Gilbert, he was crucified by the public, by the media, and ended up being a broken man, and he died a sad death in a mental institution outside of Brisbane. And it's a sad story. And, I take that history and that story and reinvent it, whereby I make my people, I make Eddie Gilbert the hero in my scenarios. And, that's 2 of the scenarios, but there's also reference to the massacres that happened, in Queensland, the massive massacres in order to steal, our lands as well. So references made there, but also references made even before the English came here. The Chinese in the 1300s and 1400s circumnavigated Australia, and there's stories about through our oral history about a delegation of First Nations people going back to China to meet with Emperor Zhu at the time for diplomatic and historical and humanistic purposes. So you know, like they're little iterations and my version of history. Another element of the history was famous white explorers going up through Queensland, Aboriginal land, and dying of thirst, hunger, and starvation. And the place where they died, there was food everywhere. So it's like dying in a supermarket. So of hunger, thirst, and starvation. So I just make a picture of that, you know. And a lot of times it's silly and it's funny, but, you know, there's kind of like an ugly truth underneath, you know, the surface of, you know, the humor or the color or whatever. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gordon. I suppose it reminds us as well how important it is to keep those stories alive and the particular heroes that we all hold that by other people from other perspectives might kind of be demonized if they even exist in those stories
Exactly.
at all.
Yeah.
So I wanted to come to, I suppose, quite a different painting practice now. Mayur and Tushar, you both learned an ancient practice of Woli painting from a very young age. For those of us who are sort of a bit more further away from what you're doing, could you share with us what Woli painting is and why it's so significant?
Okay, so yeah, Wali art form is one of the ancient art form in Indian tribal areas. In India, there are hundreds of different tribes, but Wali is one of the ancient one. According to the researchers, it's from the 30,000 BCE. Still, now the new generation is painting all the traditional art forms. And these shapes and these figures are very simple and at the same time geometric, which we can see in different art forms, not only in India, but around the world. And basically, Warli people, we do speak Warli language, but we don't have script or alphabets to write down everything. But Warli painting is a medium where we can write all these stories and experience that we get from our rituals and the daily life and the folklore stories. So that's why we don't call it painting, we call it writing. We write all the stories and everything. So yeah, and Warli painting is based on the myths and folklore especially. And in these paintings, we show the rituals and all the life connections of Warli tribal people with the nature. As Warli people, we don't have any religion. We worship nature and all the spirits and all the gods, goddesses, which came from the nature. That's why it shows the more connectivity, how still tribal people are connected with the nature.
I suppose it's a good reminder as well, or something that a lot of people are having to learn in very brutal ways, right? Is how important our connection is to the lands in which we live on and walk every day. For APT, you're showing two series, as you mentioned earlier, Dati, the Creation of the World, excuse my pronunciation, and Disappearing Spirits and Childhood Memories, which both focus on historical narratives through your own lenses. Could you briefly tell us about the stories held in each of those work? And as well, I'm interested to know what's the importance of value and of sharing sort of these very deep histories in a contemporary time.
Okay, so I think before we jump on that series topic, I would like to say that how we get into the Warli painting. So our education is quite from different mediums. Like Tushar finished his multimedia education, and I end up doing the MBA, and now we are doing painting. So it was a long journey, how we started very early in this Warli paintings. And I can say that we born and grew up in Warli tribe community. And for the education also, we used to travel every single day from the community to the Mumbai. It's a 7-hour journey every single day. And it's for 3 years we did this. And in these 3 years, we got so many different experiences during the travels and seeing the life in the Mumbai, the modern world and cities. And that's where we realized that we can bridge we can be the bridge where people from tribe who can connect to the modern world and they can present their culture, and we can get the right direction for the future. So that's how our journey was started. And for the creation of the world in this series, what we try to do is, there is a very famous folklore story in Wali tribe, is Dhartari, the creation of the world. Dhartari means the mother goddess. Dharti means earth. And there are three different forms that Wali people worship. One is Dhartari, which means mother goddess, mother earth. And one is Kansari, which means goddess of seeds. And seeds of, like, not only plants and everything, it's the seed of every life, every small creature. And the third one is Gautari. In Gautari, it shows that how we are connected with the nature, all the trees, plants, land, and all the animals that we use for farming. So based on these three elements, Dhartari is one of the most famous folk story, where we are trying to show that how our earth started. Like in the story, there are two creators who create all the story. So this story is pretty much similar to all other folk stories around the world. First, when we heard about the Noah's Ark, we very much surprised and at the same time shocked that this story is as similar as that we have in our tribal community. So that's somewhere we realized that we have so many connections in our culture and our myths and our forms that we are painting. And that's the reason we decided to recreate this story. Usually on Wali painting, Wali artists paint one story on one canvas and one artist paint one story. But in this series, Tushar and we did work together on a single canvas with one size, one with one sign. And we decided to make the chapters, which is very first time we are doing in Wali paintings. We made chapters of the stories, and we made total 18 paintings of the stories in different chapters, so we can experience the flow of the story. So yeah, basically in the story, how our world gets started, how the creators started the creation of the world, where there are two characters. One is Ganga, Gauri, and Mahadev, which are creators. And first they build the earth, and first they grow the seeds of all the creatures and the plants. And in this story, there are no humans and only birth on the planet. At the same time, we can see that there is no boundary, like the whole globe is growing together. And then the creators decided to make the human beings. And after human came on the planet Earth, they start making the boundaries. Then they start making the difference between the animals and the humans. They start depreciate themselves. They are trying to bring themselves up on the everything. And that's how it becomes a mess. And the Mother Earth, like Dhartari, who start feeling the burden on the planet. And then she requested to the Mahadeva and the Ganga Gauri to give some solution. And there was a time then he make the way between the energy to the earth, where people start getting birth. At the same time, he gave the death, like it becomes a way to go up and down, to go and come back again in the afterbirth. So that's how they tried to balance on the Dhartari, but still it wasn't enough. Still humans kept keeping the mess, and they start doing all the messy things and destroying. Then Mahadeva decided to do the Mahapralay, which means the deluge. And what can I say? It was a big disaster on the planet, where he wanted to destroy everything that he created, and he wanted to create all new worlds. So in this all journey, he chose a guy who was very godness and very kind, who pick up all the pairs of the seeds, and at the same time, one lady who helped him to be the part of his whole journey. And in this journey, the creator gave him the seed of life, where he gave the instructions that you have to plant this seed and you have to protect it for the next 100 years and prepare for this big disaster where I will destroy everything. So after 100 years, that seed was the seed was of the water guard vegetable, and that water guard becomes a very huge water guard, and all the creatures and all the rats, creepers and ants, they help him to turn it into the ark, the ship for all the seeds and all the animals. And after 100 years, they start destroying all the earth, the Mahapralay start. And all these pairs of the animals who survived inside that water guard, which we call Taru. Taru means which is float on the water. And after 24 years and 24 months in the folk story, that after 24 years, they touches the land. And from that time still now we are living on the planet. And in the ending chapter, in the last chapter, that we are showing that we are again in the same situation. So there might be the Mahapralaya or the big disaster again, that maybe we are seeing the starting of the pandemic and everything. It cannot be the disaster of the rain or the flooding, but it can be the disaster in many different ways. So in this story, we try to show that how our route was started, how we were before, and what we have done right now. So this is something about the creation of the world.
I'm glad you said that you thought that we might be sort of coming to that point again, because I was wondering as you were sharing that story, which obviously holds so many lessons in it, if you think that we might be sort of coming to a new point of, I suppose, from one perspective, destruction, and from another, renewal, which I think is so central to kind of a lot of Indigenous futurist thinking. And I wanted to come to you, Subash, now. When I first came across Indigenous futurism, it was through the articulation of Grace Dillon. And I found it so empowering and freeing. And you've mentioned being inspired by Octavia Butler before. And so I just was interested to know, you know, what was it about Butler's work in particular that opened new possibilities for you and your practice?
Oh, thank you. And thank you for the amazing stories, Mayur and Tushar and Gordon. I think we're all doing the same thing in here. We're just messing up with the timeline and the history, right? I mean, you guys are taking your heroes and the stories of creations and stuff. I'm taking my heroes from the future. I mean, I think we're all doing the same thing. So the how I came to practice in Indigenous futurism was basically most of my whole life. I was a painter. I mean, I painted for quite a while. But the issues that we have in our Indigenous society and the other socio-political issues, I always wanted to do something about it. I always wanted to work on it, but it is so close to me, these issues and these stories, that I just don't want to do it, you know, for the sake of like making art about my people and stuff. I didn't want it to do that. So I hold it for like long time. And basically I was just painting abstract arts and stuffs, and making a little bit of rock music and stuff. I mean, I kept it at bay, those stories that I held close to my heart. But then I knew a little bit about Afrofuturism from Octavia Butler's work. And then I thought about the stuffs I wanted to work on my practice. And the thing that opened a way to explore those narratives in my practice was the way Octavia Butler uses her imagination to explore history. I mean, say for instance, Kindred, it's a time-traveling novel, very beautiful novel. She explores history about slavery like so beautifully. I mean, she doesn't give a damn about how the character, I forgot her name, Dana or something. Yeah, how Dana travels from one timeline to another. She doesn't bother to explain those things. But the way she explains what was it like in the slavery and the context behind it, the stories that people had to go through. I mean, those were kind of real experience people had, right? And the way she explored it, and plus, not just the history, but the way she explores the current socio-political issues, the struggles marginalized people goes through every day. It struck me like, why can't I do something like this? I mean, I just thought like, yeah, maybe this is the way. I mean, I could do something like this. Maybe I could place my Indigenous astronauts in the future. I mean, and maybe I can bring back in this timeline and tell a story about how we are still living and how we are still, you know, speaking in our languages and stuff. So that was the thing inspired me to, you know, practice Indigenous Futurism. And the term Indigenous Futurism, I didn't know about it actually. I was already practicing what we call Indigenous Futurism. And then only I discover Grace Dillon and other works, right? And Clazy Coleman. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I mean, I was practicing something which has already been practiced for like so many years in Turtle Island and your part of the world. And it kind of feels amazing, like so many Indigenous artists, creators, musicians, writers, we are all in the same narrative, and we are kind of, I mean, even virtually or even like, what do you call it, philosophically, I mean, we are connected. I mean, and then we are kind of trying to mess up with the timeline and do something about the future and something about the present, I suppose.
I love the idea of messing with the timeline. I think that's a really accurate sort of articulation of what everyone's talking about. Could you tell us a little bit more about Adivasi Futurism?
Right, so basically Indigenous Futurism, what you just said in the introduction, I mean, it's the same thing, but the reason I wanted to use the term Adivasi is because it places that practice in context to where I was born and where I'm placed, the geographical locations, the community around it, the people around it. I'm sure Mayur and Tushar knows very well about the word Adivasi, right? So when I say Adivasi Futurism, it just doesn't include Adivasi people, because in our part of the world, we have like other marginalized communities, especially Dalits, right? And when we talk about liberation and stuff, so we can't just talk about Indigenous people in here, because the Dalits, friends in here are far more worse treated, I mean, in this part of the world. So when I say Adivasi, the term itself, the word itself, it kind of includes the political, the historical, and tries to accommodate other marginalized communities.
Thank you. And for APT 10, you're presenting a moving image work called Ninghwasan. Could you tell us about that?
So Ninghwasan is a docu-fiction, a documentary plus science fiction, I mean, a story. So Ninghwasan, the word that basically means, it's roughly translates as memory. So it's a story about a time traveler from the future, a time traveler from a future Indigenous nation who comes in our timeline to find her missing father. And on the way, she explores our current struggles. She explores from her perspective what she thinks of the current state of affair we have. And it's also about climate change, and it's also about how how we see ourselves in the future. She talks about what kind of world they are living in the future, and so it's a part documentary, part science fiction, shot in Himalayas, in the mountains, in the glacial lakes. It was a beautiful experience up there. And also in some important places of my community called Wasanglung, where we think that it's the place, birth, I mean, it's the place where the shamans were kind of originated, and those places. And then, yeah, it's basically those, yeah, science fiction and documentary.
Thank you. Here in the Pacific, we have a sort of Indigenous notion of time where we walk backwards into the future. And so it sort of means, you know, by looking backwards, we're often shown our ways forward, which I think sort of all of your works sort of do in their own ways. In the creation of the world, and Tushar, I might come to you on this one. You retell the creation story, which you've just shared with us. And I think, you know, it does provide some really important lessons around sort of climate change and the human impact on the earth. But I suppose we can look at that kind of modes of destruction and renewal in sort of different forms, like a pandemic, like you mentioned. When we look back into our Indigenous ways of knowing, and I suppose Wali ways of knowing in your case, what do you think we're able to learn about the present and even the future?
Yeah, it's very interesting thing that Subash just introduced about the future, like the space indigenous people. And I think we are going from the same thoughts that we are thinking right now for the futures about the tribal futurism. And tribal futurism is quite new word for us, as we are just recently came out from the jungles, like I can say, after the independence of India from 1947. So 1960 or 70, it was a time when Wali got introduced with the new words. So it wasn't that long time. It was like just 50 years that we are connected with all this world. And from last 15 years, we have seen the massive change in our tribal community. Like in 15 years ago, we used to walk with the slingshot in our hands in the jungles and setting traps near the river. But nowadays, like the kids are having the smartphone and they are seeking for the mobile networks for checking their social media. So that's a big change, and it's quite present right now what's happening. And the time is taking speed. The technology, the change, and the development is taking speed more than like 10 years before. And as a new generation artist, and what we have seen, what we have learned in the cities, and what we have learned in our educations, so it makes us feel that it's not becoming an artist or representing the Wali painting, but it's also, it becomes a responsibility, like as a new generation, how we are presenting tribal art culture. And it's not about the painting of any tribal community, but the Wali painting is just a small part of the tribal community. There is a whole tribe where we can see many different things, like culture, food, clothes, and how they are connected with the nature. So for the future, as like just Subash said, that Adivasi or the Dalit, which word is very similar with us as well. Like what is happening right now around the tribal community is it's more than worse than we can imagine. Like how the governmental projects, the companies' projects are taking their lands, and they got separated from the community, and the government setting them in the whole new different places. For example, right now, the new projects are coming around the Wali tribal community, which is building the dam, but to supply the water to the cities. But the tribal community is walking 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, 5 kilometers for just drinking water. So that's what's happening right now in the current situation. For the future of like how we are seeing our tribal community in the future, that as a new generation, it's not just, as Subash said, it's not just for right now, it will be for the future. Like if the indigenous people like traveling in the space and they are still speaking their language and doing all the stuff that they were doing, that will be very extraordinary thing. But like it's not just the part that we should think for the next generation only. It will be the future thing, like how we are looking our tribal culture in the future. So yeah, as a new generation, it's very important for us that how we are giving the direction to our 1,000-year-old tribal culture, and how the new generation is picking up all this knowledge. Because as everyone know, the most of the tribal culture and the knowledge is oral. It's not written somewhere. Like we just pass oral knowledge from one generation to the next generation. So this is something very important right now. We are feeling that what we are giving to the new generation, that they will keep and they will like transfer to the next generation.
Yeah, there's a lot at stake in that, right? Gordon, would you ever sort of call yourself an Indigenous futurist?
I've never heard of the term actually before this forum. I mean, I never actually thought, I've heard of the term, of course, but haven't really thought about it. But as Subash was saying, you're thinking that way and you're doing that without even knowing it. Like for example, for me, generally, when I do pictures, or be it sculpture or a painting, I often imagine, scenarios. So I guess, like what Subash was saying, my imagination is the futuristic element of my practice. Like I will take a scenario or a situation that had happened whereby my people are subjugated or oppressed in some kind of way, be it by a government or multinational corporation or by some policy, or even by, a police beating up an Aboriginal man in jail or something like that. I will take a situation like that and turn it around, or I would imagine victory for our people in such a way. And I would do a picture of that situation. I mean, it's similar to what has happened with the scenario of the Don Bradman part of the painting that I'm doing, whereby I'm changing that, whereby Eddie Gilbert becomes the hero or victorious. So thinking about our present status and imagining or doing a picture of what you would like, your ideological view of that, perhaps, could be, thinking, futuristically, but without even knowing it. I don't know.
I think you do though. There's one talk that I've seen where you talk about the lead bullets that start in Maryland 1 and how they will maybe continue into, I think you mentioned Maryland sort of 4 and 5 into the future. But how those are the same bullets that are affecting Aboriginal mob today in the world. And so in that sense, there's sort of this kind of connection that's happening, and you're also kind of preserving these stories for future generations. You've really committed yourself to such a big project, and I'm interested in, what happens if we don't do that, if we don't preserve our stories.
Yeah, exactly. What you said earlier about, walking backwards into the future, it's very much part of our thinking, because one of the old cliches that some of my elders used to use was that one of the cliches, it goes something like, the old trackers used to say, when you lose your way, go back the way you come and start again, rule of thumb. And that just means looking at your own experience, to make right what's better in the future as well. So, I've not consciously made work about history. I don't see myself as a history painter, or I see myself as an artist that makes paintings or pictures about history in a sense. So I'm not taking literally what had happened and doing a picture of it. It's kind of like critiquing or addressing that histories with whatever means that we have, for the betterment of now and present. When you mention, that those lead balls that is shot from a musket, that came about from, the first documented killing of an Aboriginal person in Queensland, and it happened, at a place called Skirmish Point. And it's interesting that it was called Skirmish Point because there was actually a skirmish between Aboriginal people and soldiers and convicts. And that skirmish was over a hat that was made by pandanus palm. And Flinders, the so-called great explorer, was offering, knives and metal pans and knives and forks, but all the Aboriginal people back then was wanting just the hat. you know, the hat from pandanus palms. And there became a situation whereby, you know, they were playing almost like, you know, keeping the ball off the soldiers by throwing the hat to each other, and the soldier was kind of running around trying to get the hat. But, you know, like, but what had happened is, you know, in the end, I guess Flinders wouldn't part with the hat, and Aboriginal people didn't want, you know, their utensils, and it got to a point where there was actually a skirmish, and some Aboriginal people were shot as well. And of course, you know, with lead balls in your body, you're going to die anyway. So you know, the scenario ended that way. But the way that I iterated or made a picture of it was I just had soldiers with a firing squad shooting through, basically creating the Aboriginal flag with their muskets by shooting through black, which is the colour of our skin. And from that skin, red blood fell to the ground, and that formed the red of our flag. But what was untouched was the yellow part, and that formed the yellow of our flag. So back then, it's like, you know, our flag of resistance, a flag for our people was formed, you know, within my imagination. But quite interestingly, what we were talking about earlier with Mayur and Tushar making reference, you know, to their creation story. One of the things that meanders throughout, you know, my history is like our creation story, one of an ancestral spirit being, the rainbow serpent spirit being, and, you know, like different First Nations people have their versions of it, you know, with the Mexican, you know, Quetzalcoatl, the Chinese dragon, and there are many different versions of this creation spirit. And that is one thing that also meanders from our beginning of time, you know, through our histories today. And that yellow that was left untouched by those first shootings of the lead balls was actually the yellow part of the rainbow, as the rainbow go up into the sky. So it made reference to that history, but sort of compartmentalized it, you know, in today. And that's the kind of thing that I like to do. I like to take things from the past and show the reference, or show the viability, or show what it means today, the accountability, like those lead balls that Lana mentioned, those lead balls that shot our first people way back in the late 1700s, are those same lead balls today that are still hitting First Nations people, you know, around the world, not only in this country. So it's a metaphorical thinking. Those lead balls are even in the form of government policies. They're even in the form of mining entrepreneurs' decisions that happen in the boardroom that could determine a survey peg going into the ground in a remote community somewhere in central Queensland or North Queensland somewhere. So like those, I guess, you know, through my art, I want to try and think of a way that I can make those that are responsible for the pain and suffering of so many of our people. I want to be able to show them accountable, make them accountable in the pictures that I do. I want to try, you know, that's in my thinking. That's in my future, is that accountability for those that cause so much pain and suffering to human people, to humans all around the world, not only in my own country.
When we think about sort of, you know, deep into our ancestral past and into our futures yet to be imagined, there can often be perhaps a clash of things that are happening, and sort of it's kind of been mentioned a little bit earlier. And so I was just wondering, what are the challenges that we face when we combine the traditional and contemporary, to use such sort of binary terms? And I think, Subash, you kind of deal with this in quite explicit ways. You know, one thing you mentioned was the combination of electronic and traditional music, but of course you also have Indigenous astronauts. So how do you kind of deal with those tensions that might come up?
It's interesting. I find it interesting, and everybody finds it interesting as well. I had a doubt. Recently, we had a talk back in Kathmandu in our Indigenous association. We had a community kind of a talk event, and then I presented my idea of Indigenous Futurism. I mean, Adivasi Futurism. I mean, we had elders. There were people, a member of the community, and I talked about the Indigenous Adivasi Futurism, right? And I had doubts like, maybe, I mean, they will be like, you know, they wouldn't like it, you know, this is not the way you should do it. Maybe they would say like, I mean, it's not the way, man. I mean, you are going far too away from our traditional way of storytelling and stuff. But you know what? I mean, there were elders from my community who were like really happy. I mean, one particular gentleman, he told me like, I'm really glad you thought about us in like 3,000 years from now. I mean, I have hope from your generation. I mean, that kind of thing, it kind of motivates me, and it kind of speaks like the older generation. They are not really kind of opposed to the technology, you know, or the sciencey things, or interstellar travel, or any notions of cutting edge technology. And when I think about, say, for instance, I wouldn't want to imagine an Indigenous community without science and technology. I wouldn't want to imagine Indigenous community without using the privileges of the technology we have at the moment. I mean, that would be, that would be kind of stupid not to use them. We have to use them from our, say for instance, Tushar and Mayur were talking about the development and stuff, right? I mean, it's not that we are opposed to developments and, you know, those hydropowers and stuffs. We are not opposed to cable cars and stuffs. I mean, we want them. Indigenous people love cable cars. Indigenous people love, I mean, you know, fighter jets. I mean, not fighter jets. I mean, jets and airplanes and. But we want to able to use it in a way that wouldn't harm the environment, that wouldn't harm the community where it's placed at. I mean, recently there's a place, a sacred place in my nation, right? And a company had a bidding and they want to make hotels and stuff. But what the community, what the people from the community would get out of it, nothing. It's just the big companies and corporates. I mean, yeah, we want cable cars and stuff, but we want to use it our way. I mean, we're not opposed to technology and stuff. So I think the same line of thought goes to the medium I use as well. So say, for instance, like you mentioned, I use electronic music as well. But I also take clues and tunes from my traditional community. And I have, for this particular project, Ninghwasan, that we mentioned earlier, I'm collaborating with singer, she's Manu Nembang. She's one of the most popular household name in my community. So she's so I'm collaborating with her and electronic music, and like say Aisha Devi. Aisha Devi is really well known electronic musician in Europe and other parts of the world. So I don't find it conflicting. I just find it. I just think that we have to use it in our way, use it in a way that suits our philosophy, that suits our kind of thinking of how we use resources, how we use the resources we have for the community, and not just for a selected number of people. So, yeah.
I suppose that's the key with what everyone is here is, you know, trying to achieve as well, right? Is kind of a kind of sovereignty, not only in the stories that we're telling, but the way in which we use the various sort of technologies that we have to hand, which of course is vital for all Indigenous folks across the globe.
I'd just like to say overall from what was mentioned just before is that, like, with technology and everything that is happening now, it's happening quite fast. But my way of looking at it is that, as Subash was saying, we do it on our own terms. Like the thinking that we're having as part of our cosmology and our worldview is that all this is part of our creation time, our dreaming, or our worldview. And we as a people and a culture is coming to terms with it. And because of our connection to our country and our lands, you know, I like to think positively that reckoning, you know, is, you know, can be apparent. I mean, I coined this term actually, which is a kind of term that that it is disarming of those exploiters of our lands and our countries and our peoples. And the term that I coined was terrorism. Terror meaning T-E-R-R-A. Terror means the earth, and terrorism is the earth fighting back. And I like to think in the end that will be, you know, that will find its equilibrium. That's what I'd like to think. And all that thinking come in line, you know, with how we're talking at the moment. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, if we think about the tribal culture or tribal art forms, so yeah, we know it's a traditional thing. We know it's coming from generations to generations, and like many times we get for us it becomes a very challenging that how we are taking it, and as a youth how we are presenting it to the world. And now it's, if we talk about the Woli painting, so Woli painting is getting way more commercialized than we thought before. Like how other peoples, like from the cities, for example, if we think about the fashion, now we can see the tribal patterns, the indigenous patterns, and at the same time we can see that native and ethnic, this word used by all these brandings and the companies. But many times we see that there is no essence or no logical connections between all these tribal and ethical things with their clothing. So as a tribal artist, it's still a question for us that where we are standing in this contemporary art world, or in this modern art world.
Thank you. I suppose I'll just move on to our last question, and where I really wanted to end this is, I think a lot of us engage in Indigenous Futurism, or a lot of our work is very hopeful, but it also deals with a lot of hard things to sort of get to the hopeful parts, right? And so I kind of wanted to end the conversation by posing a question which is asked by Robin D.G. Kelly in one of his books. And the question is, you know, we all know what we're fighting against, but what is it that you're fighting for, and what are each of your visions for the future? If we could go blue sky, Indigenous astronauts kind of thinking. We'll start with you, Subash.
Right. And what are we fighting for? I think as much as I want to imagine ourselves in the future, I know very well that the fight is ongoing. And the fight, I mean, we are currently fighting. I mean, not just in like theoretical terms. I mean, we are fighting the streets, right? We are fighting to save our sacred land. So we are fighting to protect our forests and rivers. And we are fighting to have sovereignty, self-determinations. I mean, these things, they are all in the constitutions of my country called Nepal. But we know very well those terms in the constitution, it means nothing to the people up there. I mean, so we are fighting for, now we are fighting for our rights and our connections to this land. We are fighting to end the exploitations of Indigenous people and Indigenous humans and non-human lives. We are fighting to not just, like I said, the term I used, Adivasi, we are not just fighting on our own, we are fighting with our other marginalized friends, especially Dalits. And because we think we just, if liberation should come, I mean, if self-determination, sovereignty should come, like my part of the world, I cannot speak for your part of the world or the Turtle Island. It has slightly different socio-political things, but in our part of the world, this is our world. I mean, we just can't talk about Indigenous liberation. We have to talk about our Dalit friends' liberations as well. We are fighting for that, and for the future. There was this beautiful article by Walida Marisha. She said, like, we can't build what we can't imagine. So I take it from there. Like, I want to imagine futures where we have those things that we would like to have, so that we could start thinking about it. We could start to plant seeds or whatever you call it. So I want to imagine those scenarios, those environments, those political situations, our sovereignty and stuff. I want to imagine those dances, our cultures, our rituals are still intact, but along with cutting edge technology, like I said before, along with, I mean, I want to imagine ourselves like not just the storytellers of the past, but also the creators of interstellar civilizations. I mean, I want to imagine ourselves, I mean, having, you know, those kinds of sovereignty, self-determinations, but also along with our fellow marginalized community and also allies. So that's the future I want to see. I want to. I imagine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mayur, Tushar, what are you fighting for?
Yeah, it's a big question actually. So yeah, as Subash said, that it's really important, and sometimes it becomes very complicated what we are doing in our art practices. Like in our own community, many people get against us. Yeah, this is not the right way what you are doing, and sometimes it becomes very difficult to do something out of box that what we are doing, and to express what we are thinking about the future and present. So yeah, as a now, it's very important for us that what we are doing and what we are going to do in the future. So our aim is to, whatever we'll do, we need to keep our traditional alive, and whatever we'll do, we want to do it without damaging the traditional essence of the ancestral knowledge and all this tribal culture and community ethics and their rules and regulations. So yeah, I mean, nowadays people are thinking about the sustainable lifestyle, and everything is coming out right now. And at the same time, people are saying that the indigenous people, the Adivasi, the Dalit peoples are indigenous people, and they know how to be very much connected with the nature. At the same time, there are people who are grabbing their lands, destroying their traditional culture. So it's very important that what our humankind have made the boundaries in between, in the continental boundaries. But now it's the time to build the bridges between this community, where we can share all this knowledge, and as creators, what we are, it's not only time to tell the stories that our ancestors have created, but it's also time to create the stories where people can get something from all these stories and all these experiences as knowledge in the future.
Tushar, do you want to?
As Mayur said, like, yeah, like say he also said before, a few minutes before, like just 10 years, we saw many changes. Like it's like normally we say like in 30 years we can see the many different changes. Now it's like you can see that in just 5 years you can see the many fast changes in your village. Like before we when we was the child that time, child means like more in college time or something, that time we can see the many more rituals and the village side, and more when there are festivals you can see the more all the dances and all the singing stuff and all that thing. So now it's like they are changing so fast and so quickly. So many things are changing very fast. Like in art form also now a lot of people using they are not using the traditional techniques. They are now more going to the commercial things and all things for the money and all others purpose. So we also now we are trying to keep that all artwork as much as like a more traditional things. And like you don't know, I don't know, but the Woli paintings first start from the women, the lady who before they paint actually on the wall. But now we are also trying to bring the girls who are really interested in the artwork. So we are trying to teach them when they are free. Now also some girls are teaching from us. So we are trying to put in all the knowledge which we collect from our community. So we are trying to give them from us. So and all there are many things there. It's huge. I mean, sometimes we thought when we are painting and when you go out of the paintings from the outside, there are a lot of things in the village. So there is no time to change everything, but we are trying to get the times and go there and trying to change and get everything. Basically, Tushar wants to say that it's not the fight with the world only, but also we are fighting with our own community to get through all this. Yeah, and that's the thing.
Gordon, what are you fighting for, and what are your visions?
Well, it doesn't feel like fighting to me because, I'm making art or making pictures and I'm looking at the world. But I guess, philosophically, I do feel strongly about things, like just to do a cliche again, look, see, I can't, because, there's so many different nations of Murri or Aboriginal people that I can't really represent any people, but I can only be an example of an Aboriginal person in my countries because there's so many different nations here. But one of the cliches I often think of, it came from an activist, and she said something to the effect is that we can't settle for anything less than what we've had before the invaders came here, before colonization came here. And when I look at Mayur and Tushar's work that they're doing, that work was there before the exploiters came to their countries and their land. And I guess my attitude towards what's happening in our nations are very similar. Now, in doing the paintings about history, like I got Murriland 1 done and I'm doing Murriland 2, but I got thinking, if I was to do the last painting about history, what would it be? And I thought about what a dear friend had said, and there's a cliche that this friend, I'm using cliches a lot, this friend said something about imagining victory. What would that be? And then thinking about it, I thought about Aboriginalisation. And I use that word because I play with the English language a lot. The invaders' language. I often say, English is my second language. I don't know my first because the invaders took it away from me. So I use the invaders' language, and Aboriginalisation is Aboriginal, and eyes, I use EYES, and eyes, Asian. And all it means is I want the world, I want Australia to Aboriginalise, to see things Aboriginal way.
Well, I think that is a great place to end it. Huge thank you to you for Gordon, Subash, Mayur and Tushar. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all. I feel really inspired by everyone's practices and have my fingers crossed very tightly that I can see your phenomenal works in real life. Malo lava.